Hey guys, today I'll show you a fantasy horror TV series named Black Mirror Season 6. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The first story, titled Joan Is Awful, begins with the lady Joan, waking up as usual and checking her phone. Noticing her fiancé, Krish, turning towards her, she quickly hides her phone. After eating the breakfast Krish made, she heads off to work. Not long after arriving at work, her ex-boyfriend sends her a message saying that he misses her and wants to see her. Joan, now flustered, doesn't know what to do. She's got work to handle, and by the order of the board, she has to fire her assistant Sandy, who just paid the deposit for a new apartment and desperately needs this job. Joan feels helpless and has to do the work. While she's struggling with how to reply to her ex-boyfriend, a cigarette butt happens to land on Sandy's head. The fired Sandy curses the coward who won't show their face. Joan, caught between management and staff, pours out all her troubles to her therapist. Her boyfriend Krish is very kind to her, but Joan finds him somewhat boring. His cooking is bland, a stark contrast to the fiery passion she experienced with her ex-boyfriend. Choosing to be with Krish felt like fate's arrangement, leaving Joan feeling like she isn't the protagonist of her own life, as if she's being led around by others. In a moment of folly, she decides to meet with her ex-boyfriend. Upon seeing her, he compliments her new hairstyle, calling it beautiful and sexy. He tries to make a move, but a bashful Joan stops him. The man gets straight to the point and tells her that he's only in town for 3 days, and he wants to take her sexy body back with him. Joan insists that she can't leave Krish, but her body's honesty betrays her. Realizing her mistake, she quickly leaves. When she gets home, the thoughtful Krish feeds her a piece of meat that sadly lacks salt. After dinner, they decide to stream a movie. After much deliberation, they land on a new series called Joan Is Awful. The lead actress has the same hairstyle and even the same name as Joan. Krish insists on watching it, so Joan reluctantly hits play. To their shock, the series mirrors Joan's life to an uncanny degree, aside from the different actors. Almost every single event that occurred in Joan's day is depicted in the show. Meanwhile, the recently fired Sandy and Joan's ex-boyfriend all independently stumble upon the same series. As Joan watches, her panic intensifies. How could her life be filmed and broadcasted for everyone to see? She has a panic attack on the spot, struggling to catch her breath. The storyline does have some alterations, but they paint Joan as even colder and more ruthless. She's practically a demon. Everyone in Joan's life watches this new series, but the worst part is when Krish sees what Joan confided to her therapist about him being boring and her ex-boyfriend being thrilling. Krish is crushed. He packs his bags to leave, and just before he goes, he sees a scene of Joan kissing her ex-boyfriend. That's the last straw. A heartbroken Krish leaves, and Joan is left in utter devastation. Early the next day, Joan discovered that the way everyone looked at her had changed. It seemed they had all watched the show, but worse was to come. The episode where she fires her assistant Sandy revealed some company secrets. The board was furious and fired her outright. She was at her wit's end. Joan went to a law firm, determined to sue the streaming company for exploiting her. But the lawyer told her that she had given the streaming company the rights to use her likeness, so they could use it at will. This clause was automatically signed when she registered on the streaming platform, accepting the terms on her phone and other devices. Therefore, the streaming company was not in violation of any rules. Joan then decided to sue the actress in the show, Salma, for impersonating her. The lawyer said it wasn't actually Salma, but her digital likeness, which Salma had authorized the show to use. All the images were generated by a quantum computer. In this era, it was easy to know what Joan was doing. Her phone could listen to her, meaning she had no way to fight the streaming company. She was forced to swallow her pride. Feeling alienated and with nowhere to turn, the ostracized Joan found her ex-boyfriend again, looking for solace. But after a series of troubles, the man could not rise to the occasion, because everything he did with Joan would be exposed to the public. The thought of this made him lose all interest. At this point, Joan came up with a perfect revenge plan against Salma and the streaming company. She bought a bunch of burgers and forced herself to eat them like a force-fed duck. In the end, she swallowed a whole bottle of powerful laxatives, dressed herself like a ghost, and rushed into the church, where she relieved herself in front of all the guests. She was arrested as she had hoped, and then bailed out. This incident, of course, was also included in the show. Seeing herself portrayed in such an unflattering light, Salma couldn't take it anymore. She strongly protested to her lawyer, but she had already agreed to this kind of use in the image rights agreement she had signed with the streaming company. Salma was also furious. She had never carefully read these long and rubbish agreements when she signed them. Her lawyer said there was nothing they could do. Salma stormed off after firing her lawyer. She found Joan and berated her for making her look bad and showing her disrespect. Joan was furious too. The show had caused her to lose her fiancé and job and made her private life public. She didn't even know who to yell at. Joan admitted that she wanted to attract Salma's attention and end this damn web series through her. Salma confessed that she now also had no way to deal with the streaming company. They had promised her a huge fee, but it wasn't true at all. Learning that Joan didn't receive a cent, Salma truly understood her feelings. After some discussion, the two of them decided to destroy the quantum computer. The server was located just outside the CEO's office of the streaming company. Although Joan, being an unknown figure, couldn't access it, the superstar Salma could. Salma arrived at the streaming company headquarters, pretending to need the private restroom. She seized the opportunity to take the elevator to the CEO's floor and opened the stairwell door for Joan. The two met there and entered the office together. They saw the CEO in an interview, claiming that the quantum computer could create endless content. Some of it would take months to produce ordinarily, but with this technology, it was quick. The goal of the streaming service was to provide real-time, tailor-made content for its 800 million users in its database, and they observed that audiences preferred negative content over positive ones. Unable to bear it any longer, they barged into the quantum computer room. There, Joan saw her own drama being played. A staff member explained that it was the original version of Joan's show. In fact, there was an original Joan who would see the virtual Joan playing her. Unknown to them, this Joan in front was also computer-generated, and she was on the first virtual level, while Salma was the second virtual level. But the two just didn't know that they were not in reality. Now Joan couldn't take it anymore and wanted to destroy the computer. But the CEO appeared and said that if she destroyed the computer, it would kill all the simulated souls in this level and above who think they are real, including Salma. But Joan insisted that her standing there meant that the original Joan was already standing there in reality, and that the original event this all was based on had already happened. It wasn't her decision, it was the real Joan's. In the end, she still destroyed the computer. With it, Joan and Salma in this level disappeared. The two of them, trapped in the virtual world, finally returned to their original selves. Not long after, Joan opened her long-desired coffee shop, finally feeling like the protagonist of her life. Even though she wore a shackle on her foot, her life was sometimes good, sometimes bad, but at least it was her real life. The second story, titled Loch Henry, begins with a young couple driving along a picturesque road, soon arriving at their destination, the hometown of Davis. His girlfriend Pia met his mother for the first time. Davis's father was a police officer who passed away due to illness when he was only 8. The reason for their visit was to shoot a movie themed around a small island nearby. The family kept many videotapes titled Bergerac, a detective show from the past that Davis's mother was a fervent fan of. The scenery here was poetic, yet there were hardly any tourists. Consequently, the local shops were often deserted, and the silence was like death itself. They visited a pub owned by Stuart, a childhood friend of Davis. The reunion was nostalgic, and they caught up on old times. Stuart confessed that he was having a tough time. There used to be 3 pubs in the area, but now only his remained. Without tourists, there were no customers. His father was like a walking corpse, listless and only interested in drinking. This was due to a murder case that happened many years ago. The scene then flashes back to the year 1997 when the place used to be crowded with tourists. A couple in their 20s rented a cabin for their honeymoon. They stayed for a week or so. However, when the cleaning staff arrived to tidy up the cabin, they found all their belongings intact, but the couple had vanished. It's as if they evaporated into thin air. Davis's officer father was assigned to the case but found nothing. The press swarmed in, but weeks later, the couple was still missing. One night, a local lad named Adair came to the pub and drank heavily. He acted strangely, staring at the missing couple's poster and mumbling. Stuart's father banned Adair from the pub, but Adair threatened to return with a gun. Stuart's father reported this to Davis's father, who went to investigate Adair's house. No one answered when he knocked, but as he was walking away, Adair shot him in the shoulder. As Davis's father called for backup, 3 gunshots rang from inside the house. When backup arrived, they found Adair had killed his parents and then himself. Later, the police discovered a hidden door at Adair's farm leading to a dungeon. It was like a torture chamber. It turned out Adair was a psychopath who kidnapped tourists, tortured them in the dungeon, and then burned their bodies in his field. There were as many as 8 victims. After this incident, tourists were scared off, and Stewart's pub business was ruined. While Davis's father was in the hospital, he contracted a superbug and died as a result. Hence, in Davis's mother's view, Adair was the one who killed her husband. Upon hearing the story, Pia comfortingly held Davis's hand and suggested they visit the old Adair's house. After seeing the place, Pia proposed changing the film's theme to this story because it was intriguing. She believed a true crime documentary based on this story would be a hit. Davis strongly disagreed because his father had died as a result of this case, and he worried it would bring up painful memories for his mother. Pia convinced him that they could include an interview with his mother in the program to express her viewpoint. Eventually, Davis agreed. Upon hearing the news, Stewart praised the idea enthusiastically, saying that Netflix once produced a crime drama that directly boosted the popularity of its filming locations. If Davis made a documentary about this case, it could definitely help revive the pub's business. He then brought out a box of his late mother's collected news reports related to the case. These materials would surely be useful for the documentary. Davis's father had also appeared in these news reports, and there were interviews with Stewart's father. However, Stewart's father objected to the idea, which made them wonder if there was some hidden truth about the case. Regardless, the 3 friends began working hard in the following days. Since they were making a documentary, naturally, they had to include interviews. Stewart was the first one to be interviewed. He recounted the story vividly. However, his father, who was coming downstairs, slipped and injured his leg upon hearing the interview. He scolded his son, stating that the incident had passed, and there was no need to bring it up now. One day, while Davis and Pia were editing footage in the house, his mother accidentally saw the interview on the screen. Realizing she couldn't hide the truth, Davis confessed. Surprisingly, his mother wasn't angry. She stated that it was indeed Adair who had ruined everything and had killed her husband. She even agreed to be interviewed, admitting she hadn't faced a camera for many years. The 2 informed the producer, who told them they needed exclusive content. The group decided to film Adair's dungeon. They donned forensics attire, pried open the wooden board sealing Adair's house, and quietly sneaked in. To create an atmosphere, they used Davis's father's old camera and his mother's Bergerac videotapes. The place was eerily quiet. Inside the dungeon, they used a UV light to reveal the crime scene remnants preserved for years, sending chills down their spines. On their way back, the trio were singing and laughing, which distracted Davis and caused him to crash into an oncoming truck. Fortunately, their injuries were minor, although Davis had to stay in the hospital for observation. Pia went home with Davis's mother, intending to digitize the tapes they had just filmed. Unexpectedly, at the end of the video, the footage from the old Bergerac tape appeared. It showed Adair in his dungeon, with the tourist couple tied up on a sofa. Then Davis's father appeared on screen, followed by his mother, wearing a mask and joining in what appeared to be a sadistic game. It turned out Adair was not acting alone. There was a group involved, and they were hiding in plain sight. While having dinner with Davis's mother, Pia noticed the mask on the wall again. The sight was so unsettling she couldn't eat. Anxiety-ridden, she excused herself to the restroom to call Davis, but he didn't answer. Pretending to feel unwell, she stepped outside to get some air. Her strange behavior aroused the suspicion of Davis's mother. After entering her son's room, the woman found the ejected VHS tape. She realized that Pia had discovered her secret. She rushed out in her car to find Pia and asked her to get in. Of course, Pia refused. Desperate, Davis's mother held up a flashlight and began searching for her, shouting for her to come back and swearing she wouldn't hurt her. Trying to cross a creek, Pia slipped and hit her head hard on a rock, knocking herself unconscious. Unaware of Pia's accident, Davis's mother was furious, thinking her secret had been exposed. Unable to find Pia, she returned home silently. She pulled out a box containing photos of her, Davis's father, and Adair tormenting tourists years ago. She laid these crucial pieces of evidence on the table, left a note, put on the mask her husband had given her all those years ago, and hung herself. Davis compiled these valuable materials and, after editing, turned them into a documentary. Stewart's father confessed in the film that he had spent a night with Davis's parents many years ago, and afterwards he became addicted to these sadistic games. Combining this with the case that happened later, he inferred that Adair may not have acted alone. Indeed, Davis's parents were the masterminds behind the scenes. What's more, Adair's family was killed by Davis's father, who then shot himself to cover up his crime. Ultimately, Davis's documentary won several awards and gained widespread fame, but he couldn't find any joy in his success because his girlfriend and mother had both died due to this film. On the contrary, Stewart's bar was now packed with mask-wearing tourists. He called Davis to congratulate him, but Davis hung up the phone before he could finish speaking. It's then revealed that before Davis's mother died, she had intentionally left the videotape and photos to her son, hoping he would use them in his documentary. As a result, the documentary became popular and won awards precisely because of the deaths of Davis's girlfriend and mother, which added an intriguing and bizarre element to the film. Without these events, it might have been just another mediocre, overlooked documentary. It's quite common for artists to struggle for recognition in their lifetime, only for their work to become popular after their death. Moreover, the documentary also boosted the business of Stewart's pub and local tourism. Tourists even cosplayed Davis's mother, wearing the mask she wore all those years ago for fun. The third story, titled Beyond the Sea, begins with a shot of two happy families. David, a talented artist, has a son and a daughter with his beautiful wife. Cliff, on the other hand, has a son and a striking wife. Although their lives are ordinary, they are content. One day, David took his family to the movies. After the film, two audience members called him by his full name and curiously touched his skin, asking him many questions. Once home, after putting the children to bed, David takes the chance to dance with his wife, leaving her high and dry. At this moment, his watch, along with Cliff's, simultaneously sent out an alert. Both men, without any prior arrangement, went to a room upstairs, laid down on a device, and entered a sleep state. Then they woke up together in a spaceship. It turns out they are astronaut partners. When the spaceship was hit, Cliff put on his spacesuit and went outside to repair it. After fixing the damaged part, he safely returned inside. They chatted casually for a while and then returned to their sleeping pods, inserted their respective tags, and re-entered sleep. Meanwhile, their counterparts at home woke up. Cliff and his wife had just moved to a peaceful suburban residence, far from the hustle and bustle of the city. His wife suggested throwing a small party to get to know their new neighbors, but Cliff rejected the idea, thinking it unnecessary. Switching back to David, he heard a noise downstairs late at night. He picked up a baseball bat and went down to find two men and two women had broken into his home. David ordered them to leave immediately, but the thugs were aggressive. Outnumbered, David was captured, and to our surprise, the lead thug cut off David's arm, revealing that he was a robot. The thugs also captured David's family. After testing, it was discovered that his wife and children were human. However, the thugs didn't care and claimed that defiance of nature should be punished. They mercilessly murdered David's family. Late at night, Cliff received a phone call about the tragedy. He immediately transferred his consciousness to his body on the spaceship, where he found David, who had lost his entire family, weeping on the floor. David, refusing his manly comfort, yelled at Cliff to leave. Now it is clear that the David and Cliff on Earth are robotic copies, while the originals are in space. They transfer their consciousness between space and Earth to balance work and family. It turns out the thugs were members of a cult who destroyed David's copy and killed his family. David watched the live broadcast of his family's funeral from his spaceship. One can imagine his feelings. He is on the verge of collapse. Cliff, on the other hand, can use his robot body and enjoy Earth's beautiful landscapes with his family. One day, Cliff's watch alarm goes off, indicating a problem with the airlock. He rushes back to space to find David staring blankly in the airlock. Cliff manages to get him out, but he knows something is wrong with David's state of mind. Cliff's wife, Lana, worries that David might do something to the spaceship out of despair, which would also endanger Cliff. She comes up with an idea to lend David the sleeping pod and duplicate body so he can return to Earth and experience the taste of nature. Perhaps that might help him. So when Cliff returns to space, he cautiously brings up the idea to David. David is overjoyed, seemingly desperate for a change of scenery. Thus, David, with a nervous heart, lies in Cliff's sleeping pod and borrows Cliff's duplicate body to return to the long-separated Earth and breathe in the fresh air. Lana takes David into the forest and sits him down in front of her favorite old tree. David places a caterpillar in his hand, thinking it's adorable. But soon, he remembers his murdered family and can't help but cry. Lana comforts him using her words first, but muscles later. After that, David returns feeling much better. He gratefully shakes Cliff's hand as appreciation for his help. A few days later, David presents a painting he made of Cliff's house. Cliff is amazed at the quality, and David suggests that Cliff lend him the sleeping pod for 1 hour every week. He wants to return to Earth to paint an oil painting for Cliff as a gift. Cliff thinks he can lend the sleeping pod to David during his weekly medical checkups. Lana agrees, so David comes to Cliff's house again, preparing to paint in the barn. Rome wasn't built in a day, and a painting can't be finished in 1 hour. Over time, David becomes familiar with Lana. He teaches her how to paint, and Cliff is always praising David's art. One day, they run out of linseed oil for thinning the paint, so David and Lana drive into town to buy some. They first stop at a bookstore where David recommends a science fiction novel to Lana. But then, the old woman working at the bookstore recognizes him, thinking he's Cliff, and asks about David. This question brings back painful memories for David. Lana comforts him, using her words first and muscles later, causing David to develop hormone feelings for her. Back in space, he paints Lana's portrait and includes her in his oil painting. Lana is flattered. Caught up in the moment, David plays music and dances with Lana. He begins to make advances, and for a moment, Lana sees him as her husband. But when she realizes what's happening, she runs back inside the house to stop David from crossing any further boundaries. She sternly tells him that this is not his home and he is not her husband. David retorts that Cliff doesn't deserve her and that she craves this. Cliff's son accidentally smudges the painting, which annoys David to yell at him. This infuriates Lana, who kicks David out of the house. After returning home, the couple had a dispute over the incident. Lana, using David scaring their son as an excuse, didn't want David to return. Cliff, unaware of what David had done to his wife, thought David was merely trying to discipline their annoying child. It wasn't a big deal, so he suggested to his wife that David could come over 1 or 2 more times to finish the painting, and they could then find an excuse to keep him away. Lana reluctantly agreed. However, to avoid David, Lana took their child out whenever David came to paint, denying him the opportunity to make trouble. Meanwhile, the treadmill on the spaceship broke and the physical examination couldn't be performed. Feeling bored, Cliff visited David's room. Accidentally, he discovered the portrait David had painted of Lana. The initial one seemed normal, but as he flipped through, he found some nudes. Cliff was furious. He called David back, holding up the painting and demanding David to explain why David painted his wife so sexy and naked. In his anger, Cliff punched David. David felt unjustly accused, having lost everything. Cliff didn't understand his feelings. Cliff had everything but didn't appreciate it. His wife was a lonely woman, unsatisfied. Cliff was so angry he nearly punched David again. After returning to Earth, Cliff smashed David's painting to pieces and questioned his wife, asking if she had posed nude for David. Lana denied, swearing that nothing happened between her and David. She had already hinted that she didn't want David to come over anymore, but her husband didn't listen. However, Cliff had indeed been neglecting his wife and child. They moved here with him, yet he barely interacted with them or touched his wife. Cliff realized his mistakes and embraced his wife in shame. Days passed, and David apologized to Cliff, expressing his wish to apologize to Lana in person and say goodbye. He asked to borrow Cliff's duplicate body 1 more time. Cliff, of course, didn't agree. He harshly rejected David, belittling him. That day, David shaved off his messy beard and used an alarm to call Cliff back to the spaceship from Earth, claiming that the spaceship had been hit and damaged. Cliff returned to the spaceship, put on a spacesuit, and went outside to check for damages, only to find that the spaceship was perfectly fine. There was no damage at all. He realized it might be a trap as he desperately pounded on the cabin door. After a moment, the door finally opened. It seemed he had overthought. David said he had just gone to the bathroom and it must have been a system error. When Cliff retrieved his belongings, he found the tag in David's pocket. He wondered what David had done with his sleeping pod. In a panic, Cliff inserted the tag and returned to Earth, only to find his duplicate body, hands covered in blood, trembling on the ground floor. He then saw the scene he least wanted to see. His wife and child had been killed by David. Now, with his duplicate body destroyed and family killed, Cliff had become as alone as David. The 4th story, titled Maisie Day, begins with a paparazzi photographer named Bo, making her living by selling candid photos of celebrities. One day, she captures shots of a male star having a secret rendezvous with his male partner at a motel. When the star discovers her, he offers $500 to buy the photos. She finds the offer too low and ignores him. Despite the star's pleas, she leaves. Eventually, she sells the photos for $300 each. Days later, she sees news of the male star's suicide, a result of the exposure from her photos. This fills her with intense guilt, believing she is responsible for his death. Her friend Hector comforts her, insisting it's not her fault and that she was just doing her job. 2 of her fellow photographers believe the star got what he deserved. They argue that with fame and fortune come consequences. While they stake out a female star, a horde of paparazzi relentlessly snap photos, their flashes blazing without any regard for her feelings. One of the photographers curses at the star and argues with her. Watching that, Bo feels sickened and decides to quit. The scene shifts to a female star, Maisie, who is filming in the Czech Republic. After finishing her work for the day, she returns to her hotel, sipping red wine and reciting lines for the next day. She starts to sing and dance around the room, accidentally breaking a wine glass and injuring her finger. Finding her cigarette pack empty, she drives out in heavy rain to buy more. Intoxicated, she hits a pedestrian who appears motionless in her rearview mirror. Maisie rushes back to her hotel and packs her belongings, then takes a taxi past the accident scene. The road is closed, the police suspecting a hit and run. Maisie puts on her sunglasses and begins taking anti-anxiety pills in large quantities. Her state worsens to the point that she abandons filming halfway and disappears for 2 weeks. Bo struggles without her paparazzi income and can't afford rent. Her roommate is growing impatient. One day, Hector approaches her again, asking for her help in finding Maisie. Someone is offering $30,000 for her recent photos. Bo is tempted and contacts her informant, but the source also has no clues about Maisie's whereabouts. Meanwhile, Maisie is hiding at a producer's house, but she can't resist her favorite Korean hand-cut noodles and is spotted by a delivery girl. Bo reads in a gossip magazine that Maisie loves a specific place's Korean noodles. She visits the restaurant and learns from the delivery girl about Maisie's current address. She begins to stake out the location. At this moment, Maisie's mind was still replaying the scene from the day of the accident over and over. The image lingered, refusing to fade. The next day, the housekeeper entered to find the house in complete disarray, thanks to Maisie. The celebrity's personal doctor soon arrived. He had arranged a quiet place outside the city for Maisie to stay for a few days to get through these nights. They soon left the apartment by car. Bo was in hot pursuit in her own vehicle, following them for a long while before they stopped at a restaurant. She parked her car and began to take photos, only to have her tires punctured by the doctor's bodyguard. It seemed her cover had been blown. Distraught, Bo entered the restaurant and ordered a cup of coffee. She casually learned from a waiter that there was a nearby vacation rehabilitation center where someone had rented the entire building for the weekend and sent all the staff home. She speculated whether it was Maisie, perhaps renting the entire rehab center to overcome her addiction. She promptly called Hector and they rode his motorcycle to the rehab center. The place was picturesque, nestled in the mountains and secluded from prying eyes. As they discussed how to infiltrate the area, a car arrived. To their surprise, it contained the 2 unethical paparazzi photographers. They had planted a tracker on Hector's motorcycle, enraging him. However, with the news already leaked, they decided to temporarily join forces. The place was surrounded by high fences, leaving no way in except underground. Like dogs, the paparazzi dug a hole and crawled through. By the time they got in, it was evening. The bodyguard and doctor emerged from the house, nail gun in hand. The group speculated that Maisie was indeed detoxing. Inside the house, Maisie was in extreme agony. It seemed the hit-and-run incident had left her with a deep psychological scar. The group took a few photos from a ventilation shaft, discovering that Maisie had a chain around her neck. They thought this method of detoxing was criminal, so Bo decided to save her and broke down the door. At this point, Maisie was shivering on the bed, her body burning up. The other 3 began a frenzy of photography, but Bo was only interested in saving Maisie. She broke the chain fastened to the floor. They then noticed 2 sheep in the house, leaving them puzzled. Maisie urged them to leave, even pushing them to run, but the 3 photographers, oblivious to the gravity of the situation, kept shooting. Suddenly, the moon emerged from the clouds. It turned out that the creature Maisie had hit that day was a wolf, and when she checked the creature, she had been infected and turned into a werewolf. Maisie's body began to rapidly change, showing wolf-like features. Hector realized the danger and pulled Bo out of the door. The other 2 fools kept shooting. By now, Maisie had fully transformed into a werewolf and attacked the photographers still snapping pictures. Seeing the danger, the last photographer tried to escape for his shitty life, but his bag got stuck under the fence, trapping him. Seeing they couldn't pull him out and the werewolf approaching, Hector snatched the camera. The photos inside were worth a fortune. Behind them, the last photographer's screams filled the air. Bo and Hector jumped on the Tesla motorcycle and raced off, narrowly missing a collision with a car. The driver got out, cursing, only to be attacked by the werewolf. The 2 of them ran wildly through the forest, finally bursting into a nearby restaurant. They barricaded the entrance with furniture and urged the sheriff to call for help. However, the sheriff was at a loss, not understanding what was happening. He asked Bo to explain, but there was no time for explanations. She tried to grab a gun but was quickly restrained. In the confusion, the chef cried out as he was turned into a meal. Shortly after, the werewolf Maisie stormed in, killing 2 diners before dragging away the handsome Hector. The sheriff attempted to shoot the werewolf but missed, accidentally hitting an ugly restaurant worker instead. In the end, both were sent to meet Jesus. Trembling with fear, Bo picked up the fallen gun and managed to shoot Maisie just as she lunged. Dying, Hector passed his camera to Bo. At this point, Maisie, lying in a pool of blood, had transformed back into her human form. She pleaded with Bo to end her life. Unable to pull the trigger, Bo handed the gun to Maisie, who took her own life. Simultaneously, Bo raised the camera and took her last picture that would worth a large sum of money. The 5th story, titled Demon 79, takes place in Northern Ireland, 1979, amidst the peak of the Cold War. Nita, an immigrant girl from India, works as a clothing saleswoman in a department store. Despite her harsh living conditions, she maintains a smile on her face, arriving first at the store every day to serve each customer diligently. In stark contrast is her colleague named Vicky, a lazy woman known for her curly hair. She does the bare minimum at work, selling more or less without any concern for her pay. She's the epitome of slacking off. Despite her hard work, Nita struggles to afford the red jacket she's been yearning for. Even during her rare lunch breaks, she is summoned by her colleague to attend to customers. It turns out the customer is a man convicted for manslaughter. He had killed his wife. It seems Vicky purposely handed off this troublesome situation to her. Reluctantly, Nita offers service to the creepy man. Upon learning there were no discounts, he asked her to reserve the shoes for him and write down his phone number. Furious, she imagines strangling him, but of course, she's too timid to act on this fantasy. The man seems to fancy women like Nita, frequently throwing glances back at her. Meanwhile, a local politician campaigns passionately on the streets, winning the approval of the public with his eloquent speech. The next day, Nita's boss subtly hints that the smell of her food in the break room is too strong and may affect Vicky's health. He suggests she bring less fragrant meals. She accepts the suggestion but brings her Indian spiced rice anyway. The boss, after some thought, hands her the key to the basement, suggesting she eat there instead. It seems Vicky must have reported her, looking smug as ever. Infuriated, she imagines smashing Vicky's head into a glass cabinet. But again, it's just a fantasy. While eating in the basement, she curiously peeks into some drawers, cutting her finger in the process. She finds an amulet in one of the drawers. Her blood drips onto it, and she suddenly feels the presence of another person. Terrified, she rushes out of the basement. Once home, the amulet begins to speak to her. It introduces itself as a demon. Because she smeared blood on the amulet, they are now bound together. The demon said she must kill 3 people in 3 days for a human sacrifice, otherwise the end of the world will ensue. After she gives her permission, the demon reveals its true form, and the symbol on the amulet changes to 3 stripes. The sight of the demon terrifies her, so it transforms into the form of her favorite band member. Even so, she remains frightened. Seeing her disbelief, the demon shows her a vision of what the world would look like without the necessary sacrifices. A world engulfed in flames, with people crying out in pain. The apocalypse is terrifying, but she chooses to deny its reality, believing that if she doesn't speak to the demon, it won't exist. But the demon, ever persistent, sticks to her like a shadow, able to teleport in an instant. The first target soon appeared in a remote place with no witnesses, but Nita didn't want to kill. Therefore, the demon told her that this man deserved to die. He often crept into his little daughter's room at night, molesting her until she took her life at 28. Nita despised such people, bashing the man into a river with a brick. She then ran home and threw up violently. The first sacrifice was a success, and 1 stripe disappeared from the amulet. Next, Nita had an entire day to choose her next target. The wife of the first target quickly reported her husband missing when his dog returned home alone. The man's daughter didn't seem worried about her father's disappearance, confirming the demon hadn't lied. Nita, now a murderer, holed up at home in a state of self-reproach, losing all motivation to go to work. The demon consoled her, claiming this was a novice task, akin to an initiation ritual. She was chosen for a reason, because her personality contained a violent streak that helped her do what she had always wanted to but dared not. Nita ignored him, contemplating turning herself into the police. The demon hurriedly dissuaded her, arguing that although she had to kill 3 people, she could save billions. In the end, Nita bought into the demon's words. She went to work as usual, discreetly scouting for her next target. She excused her tardiness to Vicky by claiming she was ill, to which Vicky asked her to keep her distance to avoid catching any germs. The demon urged her to choose Vicky, but Nita felt her sins didn't warrant death. Next, the demon suggested various targets, including an elderly man nearing his life's end and a young man flirting incessantly with Vicky, but all were rejected by Nita. Meanwhile, the police had discovered the body of the first target and had begun their investigation. After returning home, Nita still hadn't chosen her next target. The demon switched the television to news about the breakdown of US-Soviet negotiations and escalating nuclear tensions. The signs had begun to appear, and only Nita could prevent this catastrophe. Now serious, Nita pulled out a hammer and, at the demon's suggestion, walked into a bar. She ordered 2 glasses of Scotch whiskey and began to drink alone. The demon started suggesting targets again. The first 2 were no good. Then they saw the man convicted of killing his wife. 3 years ago, he strangled her to death out of suspicion of infidelity. Seeing his sleazy expression and his licking of his lips, Nita decided on him. She had wanted this lowlife dead before, so she followed him, only to be misinterpreted as wanting to sleep with him and was led to his place filled with fishy hormones. This living room was utterly revolting. Nita decided to take action in the upstairs bedroom. However, the bedroom was not much cleaner. She attempted several times to take action, but lost her chances due to lack of experience. Finally, under the demon's constant urging, she pulled out a hammer in front of the wife killer. The culprit was honest, confessing his continuous nightmares over the years and admitted he deserved to die for killing his wife. Nita couldn't bear to listen any longer. After a few strikes with the hammer, she had completed her task just before midnight. However, as she was preparing to leave, she discovered the killer's brother had returned. The demon insisted there could be no witnesses. She had to take him out too. Consequently, she ended up in a frantic fight with the brother. Seeing that he was trying to kill her, she got serious and stabbed him just before the clock struck midnight. It turned out the brother was an ordinary person who hadn't done anything wrong. Nita had killed an innocent man, but the benefit was she had completed her task ahead of time. However, the demon discovered that even though she had killed 2 people this time, 1 stripe on the amulet had not disappeared. After contacting the headquarters, they found out that the wife killer didn't count as he was a killer himself, but his brother did. Otherwise, the end of the world would have already arrived. But this meant Nita had to kill another person. Angrily, she questioned the demon if the end of the world was what he wanted to see. The demon explained that if he didn't complete the initiation, he would be banished into a boundless void, forever alone, unable to live or die. His fear was genuine, and Nita, moved by his sincerity, agreed to kill another person. And who would make a better target than her despicable colleague, Vicky? As the demon was planning the operation, Vicky passed a customer on to Nita. The little daughter of the first targeted man needed a pair of black shoes for his funeral. The girl had mixed feelings. She was glad the nightmare was over, but sad that her father was dead. The demon told Nita that she had saved the girl 5 years of suffering and a lifetime of healing. After serving the girl, Nita had to attend to the politician. The boss wanted to give him a suit and shoes, and specifically asked Vicky to assist him. Meanwhile, Nita was ordered to clean up the shoe boxes on the floor. As the politician tried on shoes, he revealed a devilishly evil gaze, successfully persuading Vicky to vote for him. The demon asked Nita who she wanted to kill, Vicky or the boss. However, Nita asked the demon to reveal the politician's future. Nita saw his establishing a new party after failing the election, successfully becoming the new prime minister, and starting a war that plunged the world into a sea of flames. To prevent the politician's evil deeds, Nita chose him as her next target. The demon didn't want Nita to kill him, as his superior liked the politician and didn't want him to die. Regardless of what the demon said, Nita was determined to choose him. At that moment, Vicky asked Nita to bring shoes for the politician to try. This time, Nita didn't give her a pleasant look and told her to serve the politician herself. Afterwards, Nita confidently put on the jacket she had long coveted. Her attractiveness skyrocketed instantly. While planning how to assassinate the politician, the police chief found Nita. He had investigated her at the bar and suspected her of the murders. The demon urged Nita to kill him, but she ignored him. Nita lied to the police chief, claiming that she went to the bar because it was her late mother's birthday. She didn't know the Killer brothers, and even though she had once served the wife killer, she didn't remember because there were too many customers daily. Despite her explanation, the perceptive police chief didn't believe her smelly bullshit. After he left, Nita drove to the city hall to track the politician, but the police chief quickly followed. The demon once again urged her to kill the chief, but she still ignored him. At this point, the politician had just finished his speech at City Hall. Nita, who had been staking out the entrance, quickly followed him. The police chief was also trailing them, but at a railway crossing, the politician and Nita managed to rush across while the police chief was stopped, causing him to lose their trail. The ever-nagging demon was irritating Nita, so she sent him away. She then sped up and rammed into the rear of the politician's car, sideswiping him off the road. The politician's car hit a tree, but he wasn't dead yet. So Nita approached and hit him with a hammer, then kicked him in the leg, only to spare his private but smelly part. However, as she was about to deliver the killing blow, the police chief arrived. Nita told the police chief that if she didn't act, the world would be reduced to ashes by nuclear weapons. He replied that if things really went in that direction, they would handle it. With that, Nita gave up on the assassination, and the police chief tightly held her. In the interrogation room, with time running out, Nita told the police everything. The amulet had returned to its original state, its symbols gone. After a round of questioning, the two police officers naturally thought Nita was mentally ill. As midnight approached, Nita was anxious and involuntarily closed her eyes. However, nothing happened when midnight passed. It seemed she'd been fooled by the demon. But soon, an alarm started outside and everything turned red. The demon appeared again. It turned out he wasn't a liar. The nuclear war had still broken out, and the demon was about to be expelled. He asked Nita if she would like to accompany him to the Forsaken Lands, as the rules didn't say he couldn't bring a human companion. Nita agreed. In the distance, nuclear bombs were falling on the land, swallowing people one by one. Nita calmly walked forward with the demon, expecting the journey to exile to be much easier with a companion. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.